In 1982, Jim Henson proved he was more than just the Muppet guy with an epic fantasy about the struggle for power and survival in a fantastical land. Decades later, the story is continuing with a Netflix miniseries, so there's no better time to delve into the untold truth of the Dark Crystal. Perhaps the least popular sketch in Saturday Night Live history is the Season 1 recurring bit, The Land of Gorch. It featured fantastical and grotesque monster creations with names like Scred and Plubis. Although it stemmed from the minds of Jim Henson and company, it lacked that signature Muppet magic. After 1 year, all parties involved decided it would be best to end The Land of Gorch. While Gorch wound up a bizarre footnote in SNL lore, it directly inspired one of Henson's most triumphant works. In the 70s, Henson developed a deep appreciation for the work of fantasy illustrator Brian Froud, an English artist with an affinity for bringing exquisitely detailed fantasy beings to the page. Around the time that Henson got into Froud's work, Froud was thinking about turning his creatures into a puppet-based film, so he happily accepted a 1977 invite from Henson to visit his workshop in England. Once Froud saw the highly detailed Land of Gorch puppets, he knew Henson was the man to bring his illustrations to life, and the two creators agreed to make a fantasy film together. The Dark Crystal is one of the first live-action narrative films with no visible humans in the cast. It's also one of the few in which characters speak languages invented by linguists specifically for the project. Children's fantasy author Alan Garner provided some helpful suggestions for the Dark Crystal team based on some ancient languages. For example, a language created for the Skeksis was based on an offshoot of ancient Egyptian. The one spoken by the Pod people is a take on Serbo-Croatian, spoken in parts of the former Yugoslavia. Producer Gary Kurtz has noted that people who are fluent in Polish, Russian, and other Eastern European languages say that they can recognize some of the words. For the sake of realism, the Dark Crystal filmmakers opted not to create a new language whole cloth from scratch. As Kurtz explained to Starlog magazine, certainly it's much easier to make up nonsense sounds, but you can sense if it doesn't have any basis in reality. In a real language, there are certain repeatable phrases and a structure which makes the sounds mean something. The Dark Crystal held its first test screening in Washington, D.C. in March 1982. Jim Henson figured the plot would be clear enough through the characters' actions and tone, but the test audience didn't think so, and neither did executives overseeing the project. They thought they had an expensive flop on their hands and that they'd spent $25 million on a baffling, impenetrable experimental film. Henson had no choice but to follow the directives of the people in charge and dub the movie into English.
I don't like this.
Screenwriter David Odell had to essentially compose a whole new script with dialogue that not only told the story, but matched up to the puppets' mouth movements. Then Henson had to hire a whole new cast of voice actors, then have editors sync their words with the finished visuals. In total, it took 4 months to make the Dark Crystal's audio track workable. And creating a vast and elaborate fantasy world on par with Westeros or Middle-earth, Jim Henson and his collaborators developed a wealth of background stories and other ideas for the Dark Crystal. There have been many video games, comics, and books continuing the story of the Gelflings and the Skeksis, but a follow-up film never materialized. In 2006, the Jim Henson Company announced the beginning of production on Power of the Dark Crystal, a sequel set centuries after the first film. It was to follow a girl made of fire who teams up with a rogue Gelfling to swipe a shard of the crystal to reignite a dying sun. Producer Lisa Henson told MTV that it was based on the sequel idea discussed 2 decades earlier by Jim Henson and Dark Crystal screenwriter David Odell. Samurai Jack creator Genndy Tartakovsky signed on to direct the sequel, which would have combined computer-generated animation with live-action animatronics. But alas, it wasn't meant to be. In 2012, Tartakovsky told IndieWire, "We did visual designs, we did a script, we started testing things. We were always a couple of dollars short, and it just kind of fell apart." In August 2019, Netflix debuted one of the most hotly anticipated and long-awaited projects in recent memory, The Dark Crystal: Age of Resistance, a prequel miniseries to The Dark Crystal. It all started to come together around 2011, when Clash of the Titans director Louis Leterrier took some meetings with the Henson Company. He had watched the Dark Crystal on the Titan set constantly for inspiration, prompting the company to ask him to helm its Dark Crystal sequel project. He was excited about what happened before the events of the film, prompting the company to change course and make a prequel miniseries instead of a sequel film. Filmmaking technology has significantly progressed in the past few decades, so Leterrier had many more tools at his disposal when making Age of Resistance than Jim Henson did back in 1982. But Leterrier is such a super fan of the original film that he vowed to use practical effects as much as possible.
The canvas is much bigger, but the feeling is the same.
While some CGI technology was implemented, it was only to digitally remove puppeteers from footage of action-heavy scenes. But there's still a lot that can be accomplished with puppetry, and Age of Resistance is just one indicator of the Dark Crystal's long legacy.
And now the prophecy is fulfilled.
Check out one of our newest videos right here. Plus, even more Looper videos about your favorite stuff are coming soon. Subscribe to our YouTube channel and hit the bell so you don't miss a single one.